Just addressing new buildings isn't going to get us very far very quickly. 99% of buildings exist, we have to tackle them. It's been shown by various case studies by us and others that you can achieve significant double figure energy and carbon savings almost overnight through changing practice and behaviours. And although everybody thinks that's a good idea, actually trying to make it happen in practice is proving a lot harder.
How much does the city have to say about this?
Surprisingly less than people would like to think. It is an issue, but it's one of those things. If you're not doing something, that's a negative, but if you're doing well or doing something, it doesn't really matter any degree of how much you're doing. It's just that you're not doing nothing. I think is the.
Do you think some people get away with doing one or two little flagship things? Because every big property company has dozens, if not hundreds, of properties. It's all very easy, isn't it, to put up a new development that's BREEAM excellent or very good, point to that, and then ignore the rest of the stock.
Certainly our view is we should try and do things that are repeatable across all our building stock and not try and produce one headline building and ignore the rest.
So for example, say one of your shopping centres off the top of my head in Liverpool, but is there anything in it for you to green it up, to make it more sustainable? What can you do?
I mean, in the medium to longer term, it will get redeveloped because it is one of the oldest town centre shopping centres in the UK. We do the same there as we do on all other shopping centres, certainly in terms of tackling energy. We have a programme of retrofitting each year a scheme for on-site carbon savings that replaces simply buying an offset through the carbon neutral company. We do something on site. We have a programme on recycling. So you can do these things, but the design of it is 40-something years old now. There's probably more corridors down there than below there than are in CERN in Switzerland. It's not an easy building to do, but so you just do what you can. Yeah.
But what about the retailers and the shoppers in there? Do you think they care?
I don't know whether St John's is one of the ones that's yet been surveyed, but we've got an ongoing programme of surveying shopper awareness of sustainability and linking it back to land securities across our entire shopping centre portfolio. We had a target of 10% recognition and it's running at 42% recognition, which surprised us. So there is an issue, but by the same token, if someone wants to buy a particular item, I don't think that's going to influence whether they go to Centre A or Centre B, because Centre A is more sustainable. They'll go to the one that's selling the item they want, and if they've both got it, they'll go to the one that's selling it cheaper.
Bill, could you just explain first how much property legal in general speaks for, how that breaks down in terms of shopping centres or retail and office industrial, and then how you see that great conundrum?
I'm here really to deliver investment returns for the investors that place money with us. That's my sole, certainly principal objective. Other things lead to that, but that's really what I'm about. And I'm a firm believer in the fact that the sustainability agenda and green issues is there very visibly, and inevitably will start to influence investment returns for real estate at a point in the future. I think there's scant evidence in this country that that's happened yet. It seems logically inevitable with energy prices increasing, the way legislation is going, regime, CRC and behavioural issues, that at some point the sustainability side of things does come into the pricing of real estate. And you can imagine how occupiers' behaviour will change. You can imagine how investor behaviour changes. You can imagine how valuers see real estate differently in the future and start to think about different issues. So from my point of view, it's really not a question of, is it a mission impossible, can it be done? Absolutely, without question, we have to address it. And the best fund managers will be slightly ahead of it and on the front foot, and the worst fund managers will put their head in the sand.
When you're gauging whether to buy X portfolio or Y portfolio or X asset or Y asset, how does that come up within the LNG halls as a subject?
Well, one of the issues that we would look at very carefully now, and I don't think it would have happened 5 years ago, is what are the current sustainability criteria and issues and characteristics, and what can be done? What can be done to improve an asset? So yeah, I mean, it's on the agenda. When we have an investment committee, it's one of a number of issues that we review carefully, and it's a key determinant of a decision. And there certainly are things that we would look at, assets, portfolios we would look at, that we would early on say, no, we're not interested in buying that almost at any price, because we think it's just a nightmare from a sustainability point of view. And I'm a believer, if you can reuse buildings, then that's a better way forward than tear them down and start again. Yeah, we would see it as being a significant issue on the agenda in a way that 5 years ago it really wasn't.
Now I have to give a little plug now to the Carbon Trust's booklet, Building the Future Today, which explains to you everything about this whole agenda. Before I introduce James Wilde from the Carbon Trust. James, how do you see the great conundrum, green commercial buildings, mission impossible or not?
I think the first thing we stressed was the importance of the non-domestic sector, which I'm sure you'll all agree with. The non-domestic building sector, because it is 18% of the UK emissions, has been said, and the emissions have been roughly flat since 1990, and yet there is this cost-effective, relatively simple set of measures that could be put in place to reduce emissions. So it is a big opportunity, but it is a very big challenge as well. When one looks at the numbers, and we did a lot of analysis looking at what could be done, the non-domestic building stock could reduce its emissions by about 35% by 2020. That's ahead of the rest of the economy and all of the targets that the government are setting, and save about £4.5 billion in the process. And there's not many parts of the economy that can do that. When one looks out to 2050 as well, the stock could reduce its emissions by 75% at no net cost. The key conclusion was that cost-effective energy efficiency, the kind of things that will be driven by behavioural change and things that pay back, really should be implemented by 2020. But because of a whole series of interrelated barriers, there needs to be strong policy to do that. The kind of policy response that we suggested might work as an option is twofold. One, in setting the direction. The other is having a discrete package of policies underneath that to achieve that direction. In setting the direction, for the non-domestic building stock, one could set targets. You know, we're going to achieve a 35% reduction by 2020, a certain reduction by 2050, gives a sense of where the market's going so that people can plan. But the thing is, a very high-level target doesn't really make it very real. The display energy certificates is a language that could make that very real. The other aspect, though, is having discrete, certain, stable policies underneath that to drive the change. Two types of policies. One set focusing on getting better buildings, the other set getting them used better as well. So on the better building side, the building regulations are key for existing buildings as well as new buildings, as has been described. Other measures that we suggested might be considered, one is public sector leadership. So with those display energy certificates, the public sector could start saying, well, look, we're going to implement all the cost-effective measures on those display energy certificates and start to lead that change. Another one is, no F-rated building, or no G-rated buildings by 2020, if we're really serious about getting that shift in EPC certificates. So that's on the building side. On the user side, the CRC is a very powerful instrument for the large organisations, but in a sense there's a gap for the smaller organisations. And that's something the government are actively looking at. What could be done to incentivise SMEs to ask the question about how I can reduce my energy bill? The kind of regulations that might incentivise or help enable this change are going to be coming along.
Getting rid of all buildings that are rated below, was it F, I think, by 2020? Yes. I mean, you know, we're surrounded by beautiful older properties in Britain. You know, no one wants to see them knocked down. Likewise, getting to A ratings by 2050. How are you going to square the circle of Britain being a fundamentally old country with your ambitions?
It doesn't necessarily say knock them down. We work with Whitehall Place, which is DECC's office. They moved in and it was a G-rated building, which was rather embarrassing for them, obviously. So we went in, gave them an audit of their site, and they're now a D-rated building. So actually, and that all those measures paid back within 1 year. It's the simple things. It's things like sorting out heating, it's controls, it's lighting controls, it's changing some kit, but a lot of it's behavioural. I think one would have to have exemptions, particularly if a building can show that, you know, they've made attempts to do everything that's cost effective and they've not been able to. You know, there would be exemptions.
Okay. On the ground, Chris, how much progress are we making on this almost impossible target? What's your advice to people mulling over this issue?
Well, I think what we're seeing now is certainly a lot more engagement in the subject from clients, from building owners, from property companies, and the rest. You know, when it comes to tenants these days looking for a building where they are, I think you're not getting to the starting line unless you already have somehow engaged in the kind of the green agenda and the more sustainable agenda. I think when it comes to the technical aspects of the work, as James has said, a lot of the work that we have done, some of which with Carbon Trust, basically indicates that you can quite quickly do things with buildings that will save you money just on the basis of behavioural and tuning the building up. We find that you know, in the shopping centre domain, you know, the kind of customer perception of light, and more importantly than that, I think the kind of the perception of the retailers of the importance of light always requires higher and higher levels of lighting in order to display the product.
But do you think the people who occupy the buildings and who shop in them, again, are they playing their part enough? Do they care?
Well, as a shopper myself, I hear the message, and I hear the message from all the big retailers who are all trying to, I think, vie one way or another with saying they're more green than the others. And I have a sense that those parts of the industry, those parts of industry generally who are more customer-facing, the man in the street facing, change more rapidly in this area because the man in the street is more perceptive about the issues. I think it's when they're the institutional players between those that operate the buildings and are in the buildings, and in a much more complicated cycle of the supply chain, I think that's where it becomes much more difficult to actually deal with these issues, because there are so many players with so many diverse and various interests that need to be aligned. And I think a lot of the thinking that's gone into the types of report that the Carbon Trust have done is about thinking about how you align the incentives such that the right business practices come together and that people can actually all the way along the supply chain benefit from the improvements that can be made.
Okay. Russell, what's low carbon workplaces' take on the big issue for our debate?
The brief answer is absolutely not mission impossible. Certainly huge challenge, but an opportunity. And from our perspective, it's an opportunity primarily to form a much closer working relationship with the occupiers. The premise of low carbon workplace is to provide refurbished office buildings, so only looking at the existing stock, which is clearly the major issue, to replumb them, if you like, in such a way that the energy consumption falls by 50 or 60%, and at the same time work very closely with the occupiers of these buildings. So not once they've moved in, and not just getting them to sign up an agreement to lease, but to take them right through the whole journey. So the change management that's involved from going from a grey workplace environment to a green workplace environment, and the kind of impacts that might have on them, assisting them through the move, and that could be into the detailed stuff like space planning and Cat B, to ensure that the buildings are operated in the correct way once they're occupied, but also to give them ongoing support. So we don't give them the keys and say, see you in 5 years for the rent review. This is about working with them to keep the emissions down in use. And I think the proof is in the pudding. We've been incorporated for 10 days, although we've been working on this project for 15 months. And we are overwhelmed by interest from occupiers who say to us, we want to reduce our carbon footprint, we don't know how to go about it in our built environment, and we want to ensure that we're going to do it in a way that future-proofs us and takes us forward in a recognisable way. And through that, we're enjoying good discussions with occupiers across a range of sectors across the UK. And the message is generally, we want one of those, but we don't know how to get it. That's the subject that we're trying to address. Okay.
Fiona, to wind up our initial premise before we go out to the floor for your questions and contributions, can you explain how you or how the department sees this question? There's a very deep recession, as I say. We're all behind the principle of this, but it's hard for people with very little money at the moment to do some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously kind of fully recognise that the issues for business in terms of the recession, although they're kind of the main concept of CRC is the fact that it's about introducing cost-effective energy efficiency measures, and actually after the initial kind of expense of putting them in, you do get your money back. As James was saying earlier, up to 2020 we're looking at those cost-effective energy efficiency measures that can be put in. It's essential if we're to meet our climate change objectives that we improve our energy efficiency. It's important that we balance carbon abatement across the whole economy. We already have policies such as the EU ETS and the climate change agreements, which look at the most energy intensive organisations, and on the domestic side we have the carbon emission reduction target. And as James mentioned earlier, kind of analysis quite a long time ago from the Carbon Trust highlighted that the CRC sector, which is made up of large commercial and public sector organisations, were failing to take up these cost-effective energy efficiency measures. And this was down to a number of barriers, such as organisational inertia, lack of awareness, regulatory failures and split incentives. And if we are to meet our climate change objectives, it's important that this sector does make a contribution. That's why we have introduced the CRC Energy Efficiency Scheme, which will improve the take-up of cost-effective measures and overcome many of these barriers. We do think that there's appetite for improving energy efficiency in large commercial and public sector organisations. As part of our policy development for CRC, we had progressive UK businesses and public sector bodies, particularly the retail sector, and a number of leading local authorities for the public sector side, that have actively helped push this agenda forward and have worked closely with government in developing the CRC policy. There's also been a number of industry groups such as the UK Business Council for Sustainable Energy and the Corporate Leaders Group, who played a key role in highlighting the need for robust action in this sector. Okay. I was going to say, I think most of you know what the energy efficiency, CRC Energy Efficiency Scheme is, and just to let you know that the orders now come into force, so it will start as of next Thursday, the 1st of April. So
okay, big day.
Be prepared.